Day. Good morning, everybody. Almost afternoon. Appreciate you all being here right before lunch on a Tuesday. Today's information session is short. It's a bite size, but I think it's going to give you a great idea of what MassMEP has to offer in terms of our advanced supply chain training modules and ultimately how they can help manufacturers strengthen their supply chain strategies. So today you're going to hear from Brian Deal, who's with the Delaware Valley Industrial Research Center, or DVIRC, which is actually one of Pennsylvania's MEP centers and really a valued partner of MassMEP. Brian is the lead trainer for the Advanced Supply Chain Training Program, and he's going to go through each module today and provide a brief overview of what this has to offer for manufacturers. Following that, you're going to hear from our wonderful grants manager, Lisa Derby-Oden here at MassMEP, and she'll talk about how grant opportunities can help to offset the cost of these trainings. And then as your stomachs start to grumble, if you haven't had lunch yet, we'll do a Q&A session at the end. So the reason that we wanted to highlight this is, at MassMEP, we understand, and I think everybody on this call understands that supply chains are unpredictable, from ships getting stuck in canals to geopolitical challenges, pandemics, bird flu, natural disasters. There's a lot of things that we can't control. But in looking at the companies that had the most success following the pandemic, we were able to observe some of the best strategies that they had implemented to not solve all of the supply chain disruptions, but to keep their operations running as smoothly as possible. So we're here today to talk about programs that can help you control some of these controllables to ultimately help you reduce risk and stay competitive. So that's exactly why MassMEP partnered with DVIRC to provide you with the tailored solutions to help manufacturers adopt these best practices and ultimately optimize your supply chain operations. So each of these modules are fantastic because Brian not only teaches you content and strategies, but actually works with companies to help you implement these best practices that make the most sense for your business so that you can sustain these best practices long term. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian in just a moment, but I want to introduce him. He is truly a subject matter expert in every sense of the phrase. He has extensive experience within supply chain across industries and has a real track record of helping manufacturers implement meaningful change. So we're really grateful to have him here as a resource to not just Pennsylvania manufacturers, but our Massachusetts manufacturers as well. So Brian, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Olivia. So, good morning, everyone. Brian Deal here from DVIRC, as Olivia noted. So just to give everyone a quick overview of my background so you kind of understand where I'm coming from and also, get some credibility on, me delivering help and training to your organization. So, a little over 20 years of experience in operations and supply chain. Some in engineering early in my part of my career, but it's really in the last, I'm going to say, 10 years where classic supply chain activities. And when I talk about supply chain, a lot of organizations get enamored, looking upstream at just suppliers. But that's not the supply chain in its entirety. It is from your suppliers down to your customers. And so I've had I've been in the fortunate position to touch each of those pillars from the supplier side to within the four walls of the organization down to the customer. So those different buckets and experience that I think really, brings the value, or I bring the value to, your organization and the challenges you might have. So I've worked in a series of different industries, from heavy industrial industries to packaging. Packaging's been a big push in my career. I've also touched upon in some industrial machinery. So distinctly different industries. And what's great about seeing different industries is there are best practices that truly apply to industry X and might not apply to industry Y. So understanding, that best practices, trainings, and tools that are out there under the umbrella of supply chain doesn't apply to every company, right? It's finding the right fit to drive the most value. So that's enough about me. So let's talk about the materials. and what we're proposing here. So, as Livia said, it's a balance of not only best practices and training and understanding the tools that are out there, but actually getting to use them. Right. That I think that's where most organizations get the most bang for their buck, but it also then sinks in with the individuals that have some either decision making or influence on the supply chain function of the company. So it's a balance between material understanding and applying it. And so in this, I'll go over. We have 4 modules. It's not that you have to do all 4 modules. You kind of pick where your pain point is for your company or areas you just want to be better at. You can do all 4, or you could, bite sizes, maybe just do 2. So I'll walk through each, but we'll start off with the supply chain evaluation, which is optional. Some organizations, they sense they have pain points or they could do better, but they're not really sure where to start. And I recommend doing an evaluation, really taking the time for me to come in and learn about, how's the organization structured, what are the processes and command and control mechanisms you have in place already, understand your pain points. So it's like a 3-tiered series of interaction to get a pulse on your organization. So things such as, well, what are we doing well? Let's not kill the things we're doing well. So let's memorialize that and see if we can even optimize those things that we're doing well. And then obviously identifying the things they're not doing so well. The other part is really getting an identity of how do we know if we understand our customer? How are we servicing our customer? How do we know the market, right? That's really the lifeblood for a lot of organizations, is servicing your customers. The other part of this evaluation is identifying what to work on and what not to work on, right? We're all burdened with unlimited needs and wants, but we have limited time and resources. So it's really finding, where you're going to devote your time. Also, part of this process is flushing out risks that are not obvious. Not to say that this will identify all the risks to your organization, but it typically provides some insight to 2 or 3 things that could be severely detrimental to the company, and how do you manage that through supply chain practices. And then the last part of it will be providing recommendations in a light roadmap of strategic initiatives, further out on that 3 or 5 year horizon that are related to your supply chain functions. So there's things that you can do from day 0 through, month 12 or month 18 that are very tactical and, the organization can grasp on. But then there's also the things that lead up to that larger, big strategic picture that we want to make sure we have line of sight of. So the supply chain evaluation is just a baseline and helps give your organization insight of where to go and what to work on. The first module is strategic procurement and supplier management, where we give you, best practices and then build some of these things if you elect to do so. Supplier scouting, developing that process, supplier selection, your evaluation criteria for suppliers, how to build a model for total cost of ownership. Instead of just looking at if you have suppliers A and B and you look at their prices X and Y, right? What are the other soft costs associated with dealing with those suppliers? We will also do contract negotiations. This is one of my favorite things to do. I have simulations where we negotiate against each other, and it's like, working out. Your muscles are going to get stronger the more you try things out. So negotiation is one of them. We'll also look at, as you have existing suppliers or you're onboarding new suppliers, how do you manage them? How do you monitor them? Like, what are the best practices in terms of scorecards and maintaining control of your suppliers, whether it's spot suppliers or contractual, right? Different areas call for different actions, but you need some sort of structure there. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the mitigating risks. That's definitely with your supplier base. And then looking at strategic procurement practices, big picture. to reduce those costs, increase your reliability, and being prepared. Olivia had the statement of, let's work on the things we can control. Like there are going to be things we identify that might not have the most obvious mechanism to control, but just identifying them as step one to come up with a game plan to mitigate those risks. So that's module one for the strategic procurement and supplier management. Number two is inventory optimization and demand forecasting. Everybody thinks that inventory management is kind of just black and white and pretty easy, but when you overlay the reality of variation with production and variation with demand or forecasting, inventory becomes crucial in order to support your financials, right, and also supporting customer service levels. So a lot of times it goes unspoken, but inventory is so critical on multiple facets of the supply chain. So, the inventory optimization is directly linked with demand forecasting, which is the other part of the second module. So next slide, Olivia. So I think depending on the space or the market you sell into, it's going to have a different shape and texture to it. And what I mean by that is if you're selling consumer goods, you're going to have issues like promotions or unknown or unforecasted demand or things that pop up. So depending on the industry you're in, coming up with forecasting models that help balance what type of inventory models you need is paramount. So we would go over demand forecasting methods, understand where you are in your journey. Do you even measure forecasts? If you're thinking about advanced supply chain training and topics, I would suspect you already have some forecasting mechanisms there. So it's really digging into what works, where do we see forecast issues, and trying to put some guardrails and shrink that variation down. So that's module two. Module three, this is the one that's near and dear to my heart. Olivia and the others sometimes probably think I talk about this too much, but I think this is really the bedrock for organizations to be fluent in having command and control of their business. So the analogy I use is if your company has a semi-disciplined or disciplined accounting and financial process where you roll up the numbers each month, you do cash flow projections, those sort of things. This applies for the other side of the house for sales, inventory, and operations, right? If you don't have some sort of platform and in a disciplined manner like you do in your accounting cycle, you're probably flying blind. So I would ask the question, like, how far out do you actually have a good pulse of the business? If it's not, beyond 1 month, it's ripe for improvement. Other symptoms are like stockouts and obsolescence does happen, even in some of the most disciplined companies I've seen. But in companies where it really just seems like low-hanging fruit and it's avoidable, definitely a relationship to having a SIOP platform. Do you also feel like sometimes you're bullwhipping your labor and your suppliers? Like, hey, 4 months ago we were running overtime just to keep up with orders and build a little bit of inventory, and here we are 4 months later, potentially laying off people or curtailing production, right? That clearly shows no or lack of control of where the organization is going. How do we measure things? Like, how do we measure things to make us better? Take the continuous improvement mantra and bake that into this. That's definitely plays a role. And then lastly is like, okay, we might be talking about these things, but how do we formally review it? How do we memorialize it and make sure that everyone who is a real stakeholder has either input, influence, or an understanding of what's going on? So it's really about building the process of SIOP for your organization. So the next slide, Olivia, just kind of shows the areas that SIOP touches on. I'm not going to go through all the sub points here, but these would be the areas, not limited to these, but these are the classic ones that we would build processes around identifying your input data streams to support it on a monthly basis. And I'll guide you through it. This is something where it takes just like the exercise analogy, it takes a couple iterations before your organization becomes fluid at doing it on its own. And then the last one we have here, this one is evolving. I really see, there's been a legacy of tools that have existed for many years, but I'm really excited that, with so much cloud-based software and AI, for small, medium manufacturers, the playing field is starting to get leveled. But this module 4, depending on where you want to go, it's I would say the most tailored or customized of it for the companies here. We could be going into areas such as, if you want to evaluate getting a software platform, such as an ERP or MRP, and there are some others here listed, we'll evaluating where do you stand, what would be the benefit of this, what would be the roadmap in the context of master data, and then what is the readiness and what are the things you need to do in order to even just consider implementing one of these platforms. We'll also look at, are there opportunities, whether it's in the sales forecasting or the inventory management, what BI tools are out there, business intelligence and different analytic tools that we could use. The other thing is if you are in an environment where you have relatively decent size production volumes, and that can be as small as 1,000 parts a month to millions of parts, understanding what opportunities there are to leverage IoT, so Internet of Things and Factory 4.0. So really connecting from that shop floor, from the PLC into your data warehouse, your data cube for the analytics. And then lastly is AI. Right now, in the last 6 months, we've been able to work with clients, mainly in demand forecasting and inventory modeling, to connect some existing platforms with various, two tools I'm mainly using right now is Chat Pro and Claude to do some analytics and help build dynamic models, not just one and done, but models that kind of live with the client and evolve as their environments change. And then the last piece is actually looking at, you might say this isn't part of supply chain, but workflow. Where can we make workflow cleaner, more efficient, less human transaction heavy using AI tools? So that's the 4 modules plus the evaluation in a nutshell. I hope there's interest out there. I know with our client base in Pennsylvania, there's definitely an interest and active engagement. So with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Olivia.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. So some great content, and like Brian said, in specific with the AI stuff, he's adapting the modules. He's fantastic in working with clients and meeting them where they're at, so that way they have the tailored support to take their company where they need it to. So some really exciting programs. Again, I gave Brian a short time frame to try and cover a lot of incredible content. So if one of these modules interests you, we'll talk at the end for how to engage with us to maybe speak further if you have specific questions. Again, 15 minutes is hard to cover all 4 of these fantastic learning opportunities. But with time in mind, I do want to pass it over to Lisa Oden now. She's going to talk about grant opportunities, specific pricing for these modules, and how the grant opportunities can help offset some of those costs. So Lisa, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Olivia, and thanks, Brian, for all that information you just provided us. So I'm going to start out here talking about the Workforce Training Fund grants, and some of you are probably familiar with these. I don't know if you all are or not, so I'm going to give an overview of the express grants primarily. Express grants are available to companies who have 100 employees or less, okay? So the eligibility requirements for these grants are, first of all, the people that you would be training with this grant opportunity, they have to be W-2 payroll employees in Massachusetts, and you can't train temps or contractors. They're not covered by this grant funding. Another thing is that your company must be compliant with all of its obligations to the Commonwealth, such as, Department of Industrial Accidents, DUA, or the unemployment people, and the Office of Attorney General. A certificate of good standing within the last 6 months is required for this application. So you want to make sure that you have that on hand. And anybody that goes through the training must be paid their regular wages while they're in the training itself. So every company that meets those criteria is eligible for up to $15,000 per company per calendar year. They've undergone some changes recently in the past 3 or 4 months, and one of those changes is that you can't have a cost of more than $3,000 per employee per course. You could still apply for a grant if it was over $3,000, but you would only be funded up to that $3,000 cap. Same thing. This is the newest one that they introduced, which is the $300 per hour of instructional time. And we'll talk about that in our last slide here. Because if a training is more than that $300 per hour, again, they'll fund you for the $300 per hour, but not the excess. And you can go ahead and pay the difference on that and still get the grant funding for this. As I said initially, it is limited to companies, excuse me, that have 100 or fewer Massachusetts employees. And it really is a very streamlined process to apply for one of these grants. If you work with MassMEP on this, we make sure that you have all the information needed ahead of time. So you would know the course numbers from the directory, because all of the training has to be in the pre-approved courses directory. And the other things, you need a W-9, you need to know your EIN number, you have to have your certificate of good standing. There's a whole laundry list. We send you that laundry list ahead of time because when you open up this application, you have to complete it the same time that you open it up. It doesn't save. So if something interrupted you and you thought you were going to come back to it, you would be wrong. So we always try to make sure you have everything. When I was doing a lot of these, I actually got the fastest one I ever did. I did in 8 minutes. But they usually take, say, 15 to 20 minutes to do, so it's not a big time commitment on your end. So you can apply for that up to $15,000. You can apply at any time until you've used up all of those funds. You will receive approval within 21 days. However, that being said, the training cannot start before that 21-day window. If you start it then you will not be reimbursed for that training. And again, that the training takes place on company time. Now, one of the recent changes, they've kind of messed around with this a little bit over the past several years, is companies with up to 50 Massachusetts employees will be reimbursed 100% of the approved training costs. Companies with employees of 51 to 100 will be approved for 50% of the approved training costs. Yep. Okay, so here's that 8-minute sprint I was talking about. It's, I've pretty much talked about this as we've gone along here. You would pick the course, which are the ones that Brian is talking about, and we could certainly send you what's called the C number that is from the Express Grant Directory. Gather the application materials, that's that laundry list that I can send out to you. And then we can meet with you to walk you through the process of opening up that application and applying it. And then once you've applied for it, then the next thing that happens is within that 21-day window, the Workforce Training Fund contacts you to let you know that you have been funded and you sign off on a contract. And then once that 21 days is over, you can go ahead and conduct your training. At the very end of that, once you've received and paid your invoice for the training, then you submit those paid invoices and attendance lists to Workforce Training Fund to get your reimbursement. So we're going to move along to the pricing here. The individual modules that Brian talked about are 18 hours each, and they're priced at $6,000, and they can put, up to two to five people is sort of the, ideal optimum participant numbers. So out of that 6,000 though, see, this goes over the $300 per hour. $300 per hour for 18 hours is $5,400. So that means the Express Grant would pay for $5,400. And again, this example here is if we're talking about a company of 50 or less. And the company then would pay the remaining 600. Now, if you're 51 to 100 people, then $2,700 is going to be paid for by the Express Grant. The evaluation piece that Brian referenced is 6 hours and priced at $1,200, and that falls under the $300 per hour. So that one would be fully funded by the Express Grant for companies of 50 or less, and 51 to 100, $600 would be paid by the Express Grant. And I know I spent most of my time here talking about the Express Grant, but for those of you that are familiar with the general grants, the modules could also be available if you are working on a general grant application. And I'm happy to answer any of these grant-related questions that might come up. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. I think I'm gonna reach out to Guinness and submit the 8-minute Express Grant that you did, because I think that might be a record. But really great information. Lisa's a fantastic resource. And really exciting that we have these grant opportunities to help offset some of these training costs, which ultimately could help save your company a lot of money in the long term with the impacts that they make. But really grateful that we have those resources and the wizard that Lisa Oden is to support companies as they walk through that process. So again, we're coming up right on 12 o'clock today. Don't want to keep anybody from lunch. So we'll hang on for a couple minutes for Q&A. But if you are interested in learning more, MassMEP clients, you do have a business development advisor who is kind of your account representative. If you reach out to me, myself, and your business development advisor, maybe Brian can hop on a call to discuss more, maybe what module you're leaning towards, what approach that you're looking for. Maybe you don't have time to ask questions today and want to hop on a call to kind of walk through things a little bit deeper. We're happy to do that. So my email address is at the bottom. Feel free to reach out at any time. And with that, if anybody has any questions, like I said, we will be hanging on. If you have to jump off, truly appreciate your time today. And of course, again, thank you to Brian and Lisa for being here today to provide the insights on this exciting program. Well, welcome. Any questions if you want to pop off mute?
Are there set, this is Matt Thomas. I have questions about the are there set timetables for when the classes occur? Like if they occur every quarter, every month? Is it set up individually with the organization?
We set up individually with your organization. I mean, we'd like to build a schedule that we can look out, a couple of weeks, but it's really working with your organization to determine what is appropriate. I try to keep it bite size on a weekly basis because everyone has a business to run, so I try to keep it to like less than 3 hours per week of activity, whether it's the training piece or actually working on something.
And looking at the another question, I guess, for Olivia and the team, will this slideshow be deck, or did you already send it perhaps?
I haven't sent it yet, Matt, but absolutely will.
Okay. And then looking at some of the dollar values here, is there a certificate or anything? I mean, these prices are kind of in line with like an Apex type activity, which I'm more familiar with. So is there a certificate or anything for employees if they go through this that is recognizable, industry recognizable type activity?
Brian, you want to talk about your experience with your clients?
Yeah, so I do issue certificates, and with the certificate, I spell out, what the program was and really the specific project, because this is advanced, it's associated with the project. Like Apex is great, I love them, but they typically do not hold your hand on working on a company specific problem. right? It's the certification through their standardized training materials. So that's a big difference here. But we will issue a certificate for whatever module or material you elect to go with.
Great.
Great questions. Thank you, Matt.
That's all I have, at least. I'll still listen in case there's any other.
Awesome. I think we just have Brendan hanging on. Brendan, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. But no pressure. I'll stop sharing my screen just so I can see anything coming through. Sounds like I'm hearing none. So thank you both for your time today. Matt or Brendan, if anything comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.